This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Our podcast, Spirit Matters. We are found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our guest today, Dr. John Andrews. He is originally from England, and as a meditator and a scientist for many decades, John has enjoyed following and writing about the increasing acceptance of meditation by the scientific community and the general public. He currently gives courses on meditation at the Osho International Meditation Resort in Pune, India, one of the world's largest personal growth and meditation centers in the world. John, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our podcast today.
Hi, not at all.
And we should point out to listeners that John is, in fact, in India, and we're conducting this interview by Skype. John, for the sake of listeners who are not familiar with Osho's work, and you, can you give us a little background? You were a physician, and you ended up being Osho's personal physician and presumably a devotee. How did that all come about?
Well, I first went to India on holiday. Someone said you should go to this place. I was totally uninterested in anything that sounded remotely connected with, meditation wasn't something I ever even considered. But I came and looked for a couple of days and then was completely blown away by one particular experience. It was Osho was it was his birthday, and in those days, just to step back a bit, in terms of the overall long-term story, in the 60s, Osho was like Krishnamurti, but spoke Hindi, which Krishnamurti didn't. In a sense, was very much meditation is about watching, and it's not about being disciples, and it's not about what later became sannyas. And he was very much against that. And then in a very fascinating talk, he describes how all the people who might be interested in his work were already trapped in different religions, and that his strategy wasn't working. And he very entertainingly describes how the moment he would explain to anyone that he was amoral, irreligious, and atheistic, they would run a mile and he was left talking to the bidiwala, the guys who sell those little cigarettes on the streets. So then he says, I had to change my strategy, and I had to use religious terminology against the religions, because he was totally against the religions. He regarded them as an imprisonment of man's mind. So basically from 1970, he then said, okay, he started giving sannyas and speaking on all the different religious figures. And in the process, his strategy was, in a sense, very successful, because people who had been Christians were very attracted to what they saw as a kind of a new, improved version of what they had already been experiencing. Same for Hindus and Jainas and Buddhists, and et cetera, et cetera. And then when he started speaking again in the United States in 1984, he then said, look, I don't want to play that game anymore. I've been speaking through all these other people, and actually they probably didn't even say what I said they said. And if by chance they did, I put my meaning on those words. So I don't want to play that game anymore. I want to speak to you directly, and now I have the people who can understand. Okay. So I arrived in Pune in the middle of that process.
What year would that have been?
So I first went in 76. And again, it was an extraordinary experience, because I'm just a doctor from London, and I arrive in this kind of fairly sort of weird Hare Krishna looking environment with all these guys sort of doing all this Hindi-bindi stuff, which was completely alien to my culture. So I'm in, there was a queue of people. You could kind of walk in front of Osho sitting in his chair. So I get in the queue, and we kind of gradually shuffle forwards, and all these Indian guys that sort of doing rugby tackles all over the place. And it had this sort of, wonderful kind of mad scene. And then I kind of, just as I'm getting closer, there's Osho sitting in a kind of white, long nightie, really, a long white robe with long sleeves, and one foot over the other. And I could just see he was totally delighted everyone was having a good time. I mean, this is, after all, theoretically, in not conventional terms, this is his birthday party. That's the way people looked at it in those days. And there he is sitting there, absolutely delighted everyone is having a good time, completely delighted himself, but absolutely, in some very curious way, which I couldn't really understand, was in it, but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, because you spend your life looking at celebrities and famous people and people that everybody recognizes, and they all wave and smile, and the celebrity waves and smiles. And you could see, like in politics, you could see this clear deal, you wave at me, I'll wave at you, kind of political agreement. But there was no connection at all. I'd never seen anybody who was surrounded by people who clearly loved him, and he was absolutely there, present, delighted, and completely in one very particular way, unrelated to whatever they were doing. And that just blew a hole in my head. I just had never seen anyone be able to be so in something and part of something, and yet a part of it at the same time. Right. So I'm there to sort of, doctor from Lewisham, kind of, now what do I do? I'm standing in, and the only thing I could possibly think of doing is just bowing down and kissing the foot that wasn't in the shoe that was on the other leg. And it was like, that's not the average London doctor's response to guys you meet in India, So right. But that gives you a sense of how completely unusual, and I've never experienced it again with anybody else. That kind of particular quality, which just changed everything. So then I went back to Goa, collected my things, stayed as long as I could, went back to London, cleared up all my career story and, all the usual stuff you have, houses and, all that, cars and all the things you have to sell and sort out, and then just bought one of those the compulsory Volkswagen van of the time and drove back.
Now, John, so you went back. And at what point did you learn his Osho's meditation or other techniques for spiritual development that he had?
Ask that question again.
At what point, when you went back, at what point did you learn the meditation that Osho, or meditations that he taught, and what effect did they have on you?
Well, that was, as you kind of began to sort of participate in the campus at that time, the first thing everybody did was do all the meditations. In fact, I went to the office and said, so I would like to take sannyas. That meant kind of, signing up to join the caravan. That was the kind of, and they looked at me and said, "Are you done the meditations?" I said, "The what?" So then I was shipped off to do all the meditations, which I did, and they were in a way very dramatic, because the active meditations are so much more useful for contemporary people than all the sitting that everybody recommends people do. Because Osho's insight is that those sitting meditations were devised for people thousands of years ago, different situation, neuroplastically a really different creature. Today we live in very sophisticated, intensely entwined, emotionally occupied environments in cities full of millions of people, very different situation. So if you try and sit, all you do is you become aware of all that madness in the middle. and it can disturb people. So his whole insight was move the body madly, and then you become aware of the silent center. So I did from 6 in the morning till night, endless active meditations for days and days on end. And the whole experience just totally changed me. It was probably it's difficult to say this changes you or that changes you. It's just a whole, almost a sort of, it's hard to explain, but I tell you one interesting thing that actually may explain the effect. And when I went back first, and I had done some of the meditation when I was there the first time, I had to go back to my practice, and we had this sort of very unusual medical practice, and it was very much a kind of involved the patients, and it was a very kind of people's practice. And there was this very tense meeting where I really didn't want to work any longer with one of our colleagues, because we had agreed that we weren't not going to have any Latin in the clinic, and people just, if it's flu, it's flu. Calling it a viral upper respiratory tract infection didn't add anything. So let's just talk English and be natural and ordinary and help patients discover what they need for themselves. That was the philosophy behind it. But this particular colleague was really stuck in the old medical model, and that was hopeless for us. So we had this public meeting. So they said, well, what is it you don't like about this person? It was kind of fairly intense meeting. And in the old days, I would have given reasons and explanations and all that kind of cerebral blah, blah. And all I did is I just held out two hands, and they were shaking. And that was my argument.
Mm.
So in some, which was something I would never have done before I actually started to kind of change the whole way of looking at things as being something to do with, it wasn't just a kind of cerebral exercise. It was about the body. It was about feeling. It was about sensitivity, about receptivity, about listening, about noticing yourself, and all those things, all of which were strongly supported by all the active meditations.
John, as long as you brought up active meditation, when Osho was in the U.S. And had a lot of media attention, and for the sake of listeners who don't know what we're talking about, he was then known as bhagvan-shree-rajneesh. The moving meditation, the active meditation, which involved a lot of what outsiders would look at as very strange, often collective group situations of people moving about in strange-looking ways. There was a method to that, and you alluded to it. Can you describe the technique a little bit more, so people who may just have remembered seeing images of it on TV know a little bit more about the rationale?
Well, there are many different active meditations. Probably the most famous is called Osho Dynamic Meditation. And this is a very, very revolutionary technique, because if you notice yourself that when you get into a state, you get angry or sad or happy or delighted or whatever, you probably notice that your breathing takes on a particular habitual relationship with that particular state for any particular individual. So what's so genius about this method is you spend the first 10 minutes breathing irregularly, and you don't have to do it with anyone else. You can do it on your own. It's nothing, there's no kind of group phenomena about it. It's just what happens to you. Sometimes it can be more supportive if you're with other people, but it's got nothing to do with other people. And everyone naturally would do it differently. So you intensely fast, rapid breathing for 10 whole minutes, totally irregularly, which is actually quite complicated. It's not a natural thing we would do out of our normal habit of breathing regularly. So one of the keys to the whole meditation is you need to be conscious, alert, and aware throughout, which of course is necessary if you're going to manage to breathe irregularly for 10 whole minutes and not just fall back into a coma and breathe like a steam engine in regular, usual mode. But the effect of that is to so disorientate the 10% of the conscious mind, which interestingly is the part which keeps the unconscious unconscious. So people think, the unconscious gets a kind of bad rap because people think it's kind of trying to give you a hard day. But actually, it takes care of your breathing, your immunity, your digestion, your heart rate. It's maybe the best friend you ever had. But it gets a bad rap because it's also in the left luggage business, because every time you hit something you just cannot manage, what do you do with it? You stick it in the unconscious, whether it's something you're guilty about or feel shameful about or you want to forget about or ignore, whatever it is. So now we all walk around with a whole pile of stuff in the unconscious, which we have no idea what's there by definition because it's unconscious, but you something's always going on. I mean, the best example, let's say the road rage examples on the LA freeway, right? So someone's in a traffic jam. So something inside their brain thinks it's a good idea to get out of their car, go to the car in front of the millions in front and shoot the guy driving that car. I mean, it has some rationale inside that guy. I mean, something is triggered inside him. He hasn't a clue what it is. And one thing's for sure, it's got nothing to do with the poor driver in front. So we have no idea. You're suddenly in a situation and you find yourself really upset about something. Why? Because it gets triggered by something in the unconscious. So the whole point of this meditation is you do that breathing for 10 minutes and that character, if you like, the conscious mind loses its ability to stop all that's repressed in the unconscious coming to the surface. So in the second stage, whatever's there can just come to the surface. And the whole key is to allow whatever repressed emotions are there to come, to be freely expressed. And it's not just about expressing emotions, it's about learning to watch them. Right. So and the watching is the key to the whole game of meditation.
Well, let me ask you, John, in regard to that. So you do these active meditations from Osho, and they have their immediate effect, I would think.
Yeah.
You come out, you feel a certain way in a particular day. But by regularly practicing these active meditations over days and weeks and months and years, as you have decades, what are the cumulative effects? What direction are you growing in? What changes in your consciousness, your psyche, your physiology as a result of years of practice?
Oh, okay, let's just be clear. Osho's not saying do Osho dynamic meditation for a month maybe would be quite enough. Who knows? Everyone is different. But the reason for doing them is so that you start to be able to watch. So then perhaps the greatest revolution in terms of his meditation is learning his speaking. So for example, people hear him speaking and you would normally think this is a kind of, just a TED talk or a erudite professor talking, and then he explains, I would be happy not to talk. I would like to be able to sit here in silence with you. But you guys are hopeless. You can't sit in silence. That's why I'm speaking. So he's really, just like say with Vipassana, because the body's in real time, yeah?
Right.
The mind could be anywhere, but any sensory phenomena, if you're experiencing a sensory phenomena, you have to be here too, otherwise you wouldn't notice it. So, brilliant idea from Buddha, watch the breathing. You can't not breathe anyway, and there are little gaps between the in-breath and the out-breath. So, watching the breathing, if you notice, chances are you're here. If you missed it, chances are you're somewhere else. So what Osho's done is take exactly the same methodology with lots of advantages now. It's sort of major upgrade on Vipassana, where you're using sound, which is another sensory phenomena, which is also in real time, which is also happening now. So if you notice, you're present, and if you don't notice, you're absent. which is not complicated. It's a very old idea called the art of listening. So let's say everyone's had the experience. You're talking to somebody, and while you're talking to them, they don't stop speaking themselves. And you want to say to them, listen, if you don't shut up, how can you hear what I'm saying? And then there's the other situation. You're talking to someone, and while you're speaking, you can hear their answer bubbling up to the surface. And as soon as you stop speaking, they just throw their answer all over you. You also know they didn't hear a word. Now, turn that around, and let's say, okay, so what I realize is unless the person is quiet, they can't hear what I'm saying. Common sense. Now, let's say you said, actually, my project, my interest is to learn how to be silent, how to be quiet. Aha. So if I could learn how to listen, I would learn how to be silent. So that's the methodology behind the art of listening. So in terms, the active meditations are really like a long jump into the ability just to sit quietly and start to discover for yourself what it means to become receptive, and in this particular situation, to learn how to listen, because you can't blink your ears even if you want to. So the most difficult thing about meditation is, how do I do nothing? What does that mean even? So when you think of listening, you couldn't think of anything more passive than that. So for me personally, the first experience during one of Osho's talks of actually seeing that there are things called thoughts that are going past is my first experience. Aha, so I'm not my mind. There are things over there that whatever this thing, okay, whatever this watching phenomena is, it's able to watch the mind. Ah, interesting. So then the next discovery is that the more you are able to see the thoughts, the more they disappear. The more you're able to be conscious of your emotions, they disappear. So there were also fascinating courses that were done here, which are still done, but in those days there was a particular one, for example, on emotions. It's a simple exercise. So you're opposite somebody, same as dynamic meditation. You're totally one with an emotion. You want to kill the guy in front of you, whatever it is. And then you stop dead. And there you are left with this sort of bizarre homicidal look on your face. Close your eyes and just watch anger inside you. And it just disappears. And you think, what the hell is that? I'm not my anger. I'm not my thoughts. So that slowly, as time goes by, you actually start to become increasingly the watcher and not endlessly pulled this way and that way by thoughts and feelings of a particular situation.
John, people listening from the U.S. Will remember the few years that Osho was in Oregon, and all kinds of controversies erupted, and it was widely reported, and well, a lot went down. Were you here with him during those years at Rajneeshpuram in Oregon?
Yes, well, you happen to be speaking to the one person who was most badly affected by that. That was his secretary, Sheila Silverman.
Yes.
And so she made a pretty good attempt to polish me off.
Well,
and
you mean physically or
physically? Physically,
oh,
wow.
Really? No, I got a needle in my bum while I was, I used to do the read some pieces during what was then satsang. That was before Osho stopped all the silent sitting when he said, "You guys are hopeless." But he was still experimenting with that, and so I would do some readings in between. And this lady was sitting behind me, and I didn't know what I just sort of looked, and the next thing I get this sharp needle in my bum, and I'm going, "Oh my God, what the hell is that?" Anyway, that's another story, but. Eventually, I got to the hospital, and I'm a tough old guy, so I actually survived.
Well, you weren't so old then, I'm sure, but maybe you can just sort of set the record straight, since you were an insider at the time, and there was, tremendous amount of publicity that people I've spoken to sort of felt that Osho was victimized by inference, and that Sheila, who I think ended up in jail, did she not? Was the
Yeah, she got 4.5 years for my attempted murder.
Oh, is that true? For your attempted murder?
But what was her motivation? Why was she against you?
Well, anybody, you see, by that time, when she started, she was all, okay, even going to Oregon was not Osho's idea. So he's in New York, in this place, Gibbs Castle, in Montpelier, is it? Upstate New York. So anyway, near New York. And interestingly enough, there was an airport at Woodstock, which was already built, and they had roads, and we could have just moved in right away. It's actually kind of not a bad place to go with a name like that. I mean, why not? And anyway, Osho said, so that would be good. And then Sheila said, no, she had some other idea. And you have to understand, he is not interested in running things. And now this is very hard for people to understand, because one lot of people will say, well, he's the boss, he's in charge, he should make sure this, that, and the other. The difficulty of understanding, if someone's a mathematics professor, then you look at all the students and you judge how good a mathematics professor is depending on their mathematics, right? I mean, that's pretty natural. But supposing you're not teaching mathematics, your key teaching is freedom. So now how do we judge? You're free to do what he says, and you're free not to do what he says. That's not his business. So this is already getting a little bit subtle. So he's in America at her invitation. So she says she wants to go to Oregon. Okay, this is your show. He just gives his suggestion. If you want to do something else, it's absolutely your responsibility. You do what you decide. He's in no way at all authoritarian. His whole approach to life is everybody's an individual, and only they can decide what's best for them. They may make mistakes, but that's how we learn. So we get to Oregon, and the first thing he says is, well, where are all the trees? We've come to a desert. So it was not a great decision right from the start. Here we are in the sort of Oregon high desert, in a farm that no one had been able to do anything with for decades. It was an unwanted piece of land, basically. So then to start with, it all starts to get built and moves, and it's an incredible experiment, by the way. If you look at the world today, what would you say? Wouldn't it be good to have a really good working model, a pilot experiment of how people could live together? There would be full employment because everyone is sharing what the work there is to be done, where there's a whole atmosphere of celebration and people aren't broken up into little boxes and little families and little... So it was an amazing experiment going on. And then gradually, Sheila started to kind of go off track. And the big mistake she made was, for Osho, his only interest is to take advantage of any situation that existence provides as an opportunity to help people to discover themselves. And he doesn't, any situation he could use. So here we were in India before going to the States, and everyone is kind of, this is, what are we doing in India? This is the place, the land of the free, the land of the brave, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. Hey. So there was all that kind of, sort of American dream energy. And as it happens, Osho was very sick and had to go somewhere where he could have emergency surgery on his back if he needed it. So one thing led to another. So we're now in the United States. And then Sheila's idea was, she thought, because he had spoken very beautifully about the possibilities of a communal life replacing individual family life, which had been the model up in the world. And he said, in the future, people will want to live more communally, like you have now gated communities and all those different kind of communities already happening. And this was an experiment in exactly that direction. So perfectly good. We can use this situation as a doorway for self-discovery. She thought that he just wanted a commune.
Mm.
And she thought she was going to be the one who was going to present the commune on a plate, his vision. Here you are, voila, I am the great disciple who's given, which had nothing to do with anything. That was complete misunderstanding. We just happened to be in Oregon. We happened to be building a commune. We happen to be doing whatever we happen to be doing. And everything that you happen to be doing is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, to become more aware. That was his only interest. And if commune's perfectly good, other things could be perfectly good. And she just got obsessed with the success of that particular situation. And at the same time, I mean, don't forget, this is a pretty provocative situation. So you have a non-American from India who wears a dress and a funny hat and drives a fleet of foreign cars.
Rolls Royces, not to
put a finer point
on it.
Right.
Around a city named after him, where everyone wore red, where there was no support for private property or the family, where everybody worked 7 days a week, which was totally vegetarian, right in the middle of Oregon cowboy country.
We should mention that this was not Portland, Oregon.
Eastern Oregon, which is very like Wyoming. Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, that was the irony. Portland had taken all the beautiful cultivatable land and built a city on it, and then all the people, the sort of intellectuals from Portland, then caused absolute havoc trying to get rid of us in the high desert, which you couldn't grow anything practically. And so there was this whole ecological people, and you shouldn't build a city, and there was so much prejudice, as you can imagine. It happens everywhere, all around the world.
Well, but there was a lot of conflict with the townspeople nearby and so forth.
Right. Well, for example, that was a perfectly good example. We just wanted to be where we were. We didn't need to go anywhere. So then along come all these laws and regulations and attempts to stop us just creating a little city there. No, you can't do it there. You're not allowed. You can't have an office here because it's farmland. Aha. So where can we have an office? Oh, you have to go to the nearest town. So we go to the nearest town, and of course, all hell breaks. I mean, one thing led to another, but there was several different things going on. One, nobody there really wanted this weird group of people who wore red and, whatever the hell they were on about. They weren't like local people, right? So there was the usual anti-foreigner energy. Plus, Sheila began to lose it when confronted by all this antagonism, and there was a lot. And she began to kind of almost become like them.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of decided she had to use more and more bizarre tactics in order to survive, because her big passion was to present Osho with his commune. And of course, she must have realized, Jesus, why didn't I go to Woodstock? It would have been much better than coming here. So now her whole ego and her investment, personal investment in making a success of it and not wanting to fail. So she gets more and more bananas and behaves in a worse, ridiculous, kind of just really antagonistic towards everybody. She's bugging the whole commune.
And some of it ended up being criminal behavior.
Right.
Well, I mean, what do you call it? Wiretapping? That's a crime, right? So, trying to kill me, wiretapping, there were all kinds of allegations about trying to do things in the local county. And I mean, absolutely. And then she went and they went and spread bugs on the salad bars and they made everybody sick. I mean, just to stop them voting so they could, complete crazy.
John, we have a few minutes left, and I want to wrap it up, but it seems like it all ended on a good note. And I have not been there, but I hear that your meditation center in Pune, India is spectacularly beautiful and well established there. So just in the few minutes that we have, how did that transition take place?
Well, that after America, Osho then went on a kind of world tour and went to many different places, and in a way demonstrated how there are not many places who are ready to really look at what the future requires in terms of a different way to live, a different approach to life, and came back to Pune, and then we rebuilt this incredibly beautiful campus here where exactly the same meditations are available, and they are the most revolutionary meditations on the planet. I mean, this is, if Buddha came back after 25 centuries, he would look at us a lot and he wouldn't just say, oh, I've got nothing to add after 25 centuries, not someone as creative as Buddha. He would look at us and say, you guys are very different. You need a totally different approach. And that's essentially what Osho is offering, not just to us, but to everybody.
And John, if somebody listening in, and I'm sure there will be people who want to know more about this or want to pursue it or visit Pune or learn these meditations, where would they go for that information?
Well, Osho.com would be a very good place to start. It's got all the information about visiting here. You can do all the meditations. You can do them online. You don't have to go anywhere. These are very simple methodologies. You need to know how to do them, and you have to take the trouble to find out for yourself. It's not that you need someone particularly to teach you, but you need to do a little homework and do it yourself. Do them absolutely anywhere. One of the things about Osho is, for him, the beauty of the process is that everyone's an individual, everyone's path is their own, and they have to walk the walk themselves. As he says, meditation can't be taught. It can be caught, but not taught.
Mm-hmm.
So, and John, I'm told that the resort in Pune is quite a lovely facility, and a lot is available there aside from Osho's meditation methods. Is that right?
Yes, there's a multiversity with lots of different methodologies. Perhaps the most famous is the Mystic Rose, which is a really dramatically effective 3-week process where people spend 3 hours a day laughing and 3 hours a day crying, and then 3 hours a day just sitting, plus the evening meeting throughout, and in the last week, or if they want at any other time, the other active meditations as well. So that's probably one of the most powerful experiences anyone could possibly have in terms of who am I? What the hell is this strange game called me walking around? What is this all about?
Right. John, any final words you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, just that, as you can see, there are so many people now beginning to appreciate the value of meditation. Unfortunately, most of it is based on a Western idea of what meditation is, And that it would make a lot of sense. There's probably nobody ever who really went into the details of at all levels than Osho. So start meditating wherever you are. Take a good look at the active meditations, and then I would recommend they can go to osho.com library. They can read everything he ever said. They can search for everything. Any question they have, they will find a more profound, entertaining, amusing, unusual answer than probably they will ever find anywhere else.
I'm glad you mentioned the entertaining and amusing part.
Yeah, humor
he certainly was that.
Yeah, and I think that's important because a lot of people, when they think of meditation, they think of something very solemn and very dreary, where it seems like Osho's message was one of happiness and joy.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons for having so much dancing included in all the meditations, life is a dance. Life is for living. It's his biggest contribution was to defy. One lot of people are materialists, and they're the sort of eat, drink, and be merry because that's all there is group. And then there's another lot of people who are spiritualists who are sort of think it's all rather special and superior, and spiritual is rather kind of, definitely superior to all that nasty material stuff. And Osho regards that as a complete insanity, that you divide life into two and you carve it up between the material and the spiritual. I mean, how do you possibly make such a determination? I mean, if you have a good poop in the morning, do you say that's spiritual or unspiritual? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So his whole idea was that it's both together. The only holy thing, if you want to use such a word, is if it's whole. So his big contribution was not to have Buddha over here and Zorba, the Greek, the materialist, over here, but to put them together and create a new human being who was really Zorba, the Buddha, whose feet were firmly on the ground and whose hands could touch the stars. And then to rub it in, he then said, and if you have to choose between Zorba and Buddha, always choose Zorba, because at least Zorba might become Buddha. Buddha is never going to become Zorba.
Well put.
Very good. On
Very
that
good.
note, we can wrap it up on that note. Thank you, John.
Okay,
Thank you.
fun.
This is
Thank you
Spirit
so
Matters.
much.
This is Spirit Matters at spiritmatterstalk.com. I'm Dennis Money, my co-host Phil Goldberg, and our guest today, Dr. John Andrews. Thank you so much, John.
Great, thank you. That was fun. Nice to talk to you.
Great.